We're all connected to this universal energy, God, the life force, Jehovah, whatever you want to call it. There is a thing, the life force, that you connect to through your breath. When they took the ventilator out of my mouth and I could breathe on my own, I had this sort of peace when I understood how it all works. It's so beautiful and it is so simple. You breathe in, joyful, all religions ever in the world, we all sing. Humans sing. You breathe in, connect to God, and then you breathe out, joyful noise unto the Creator. It's a thing.
What if every breath you take connects you to something far greater than yourself? Will Henshall, a musician, entrepreneur, personal growth leader, and my guest on today's show, knows this firsthand. After a near-death experience left him clinically dead for 20 minutes, he returned with a profound understanding of life, connection, and purpose. In our conversation, Will talks about how his NDE reshaped his view of human connection, why aspen trees hold a powerful spiritual lesson, and how breath itself is the key to tapping into universal energy. Will also shares the evolution of M.E.T.A.L, a men's group, and its impact on its members, and how men's groups provide deep support, accountability, and personal growth. We explore how successful men navigate the emotional void that often follows major achievements, and the importance of cultivating authentic relationships without transactional motives. This conversation goes far beyond success in business. Will's brush with death opened his eyes to profound truths about life, breath, and human connection. His insights may just change your perspective on what matters most. Through his story, you'll discover how close we all are to the divine and why every breath is an opportunity to tap into something greater. Will, it's so great to have you back on the show.
Yeah. So nice to see a familiar face. It's a pleasure.
So I've been a very ardent supporter of M.E.T.A.L, talked about it in a number of episodes here. And I've gotten some incredible friendships from that men's group, that brotherhood. It's an incredible mastermind network of high caliber men. So how did you end up going from a member of that group, because you were a member, that's how I got to know
That's
you,
right. Yeah.
and now you're running the organization, which is Ken Rutkowski's brainchild. So how did that come about?
You hear stories in the military where everybody's standing in a line and they say, everybody apart from Henshall, one step backwards. They go, thank you for volunteering, Henshall. I kind of got voluntold. What happened was in 2000, I joined the M.E.T.A.L Men's Group. By the way, for anyone listening, it stands for Media, Entertainment, Technology, Artists, and Leadership. That's where the organization started, with men from that. And we're a men's group because we are better men in the rest of the world when we're in regular contact and company with other kind, heart-centered men from many different backgrounds. So just to be clear about that. I became a member in 2009. I met some amazing men like you, Stephan, who I would not have met. And for me personally, the most valuable thing in M.E.T.A.L has been meeting highly successful men from many different heritages and backgrounds and professions, and realizing that success defines success, monetarily, personally. There's lots of ways to define success. But having a group of men who care about you, who get to know you, who you can trust, that have not got an agenda, is of absolute incredible value in your life. So between 2009 and 2020, I was a member, and it was a wonderful experience. I met hundreds of guys. And then in 2020, Ken's management team that were running M.E.T.A.L with him changed, and he needed some help, and I leaned in and got voluntold to be Ken's partner in the organization. And it's been a fascinating ride, because it's actually touched on I've done 8 startups in my life, and M.E.T.A.L is part media subscription because we have a Saturday flagship show, which is like a sort of a TED for private TED for successful guys with 3 guest speakers every Saturday morning. It's a Zoom event. Then we do 3 in-person events every year. 2 of them are more membership based, and one of them is a conference. And then there is this community aspect, which is how you and I met. So it's these 3 kind of areas of how metal works. Each one of those sort of products, if it's a product, is very much linked to something I've done before. I ran Focus at Will, which is a media subscription business, right? I was in a band, which is all about, back in the day, which is all about live events and how do you maximize your audience. And then I was one of the other businesses I ran a photography agency here in Los Angeles, which was part of an events business. So I've been around the event space, right? And then, the mechanics of running a community and understanding the dynamics, especially of a herding cats kind of community with a whole bunch of disparate, super successful guys. That became, because I've been adjacent to the group for a long time, I started to understand how successful men connect with each other and why. What when what is the real value to meeting another guy who you would never normally meet, but having a framework and a sort of a process to be able to become friends over time. Right. So you and I met through this group, and we've hung out in person many times over the years. If we'd have met during normal sort of business structure, we may have liked each other, and I may have said, "Hey, Stephan, do you want to get a coffee somewhere?" And we may or may not have had the time to do that, but we wouldn't have had the framework to get to know each other in a space without any kind of expectations apart from being interested in similar things, having a similar mindset. And that led me to really leaning in at this stage in my life. There's one more thing too, which is I had a near-death experience in 2018, and that was a real reset. I had an unexpected, out of the blue heart attack and died for 20 minutes. My heart was stopped and was brought back by my beloved wife, Melissa, and the medics. And I recovered and have a new profound understanding of what matters, what doesn't matter.
Mm.
And so one of the things I said when I came back is men's work is really important. How do we change things? Get together with other intelligent men in a group that is independent and we don't talk politics, and it's about friendship. That's how we can change things. So it's a meandering answer to a very specific question.
Well, we're going to dig into some of the aspects of that answer shortly, but I just want to say that it's been such an incredible community, family for me. I've had great friendships come about from being a M.E.T.A.L member for, I don't know how many years, 8 years, I think, 9 years I was a member. And actually a number of guests on this show are M.E.T.A.L members. Sam Morris, Neil Cannon, Chris Steele, Ken Dubner. Well, you were a
Yeah.
guest.
Back in the
2017.
day.
There's probably dozens
Yeah.
that came out of conversations and either in the in-person events, because it used to be in person. That's another thing
Yep.
too. Is what a pivot when you guys had to reinvent yourselves during the pandemic,
Yeah.
going from a largely in-person, well, actually
Yeah.
almost
In
completely
person.
in-person.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would go locally in the LA area to your events every Saturday, and I loved it.
Yep.
And they were in these theaters that were like, it was such a great experience. And I missed when it went virtual, but then you made it grow even
Yeah,
larger.
that's right.
And how were you able to pull that off?
I know the pandemic was a blessing in disguise. That's a short version of a kind of a long story. The the advantages of having a group of 200 or 300 guys get together every week, where Ken Rokowski, who's my partner in crime, you've heard us talking about him. He's the host with the most. He's been around. He's as good as it gets as a media host and a talk show interviewer. And in person, you develop this kind of ritualistic, you know, thing that you do every week on a Saturday morning here in LA. And when the pandemic came, obviously, Ken, by the way, one of his geniuses is always looking over the horizon. He was the first guy that told us about Bitcoin. He was the first guy that talked to us about quantum computers. He's the first guy that talked to us about the pandemic. He just has this ability to kind of see what he thinks is going to, what's going to happen. And so he said to us in December 2019, he was like, this pandemic is going to kick in. And we're like, nah, mate. Oops. He said it is. And so, yeah, in March, we were like, oh, we're just going to, there's going to be a lockdown. We're going to take this into Zoom. And I'd been doing large attendee Zoom calls with the new feature at the time of the breakout rooms. And I've been experimenting with social engineering, like getting guys into rooms and sort of managing their conversation and setting expectations. And I said to Ken, I think we can take this during this next period. None of us knew how long the pandemic was going to go for, right? But temporarily, we can take it online. And then what happened was that there were guys who were in the community said, oh, I've got a buddy in New York. He'd love this. Oh, there's a guy in Canada. There's a guy in Dubai. There's da-da. And all of a sudden, the existing members started hooking us up with men who are not local. And we grew the organization 3 times, 3x'd it during the pandemic. It was fantastic. And then at the end of the pandemic, now what do we do? Because we've now got 2/3 of our members are not in Southern California, and we've got this thriving kind of virtual community. So that's when, as soon as we could, in person, 3 events a year. We just did one. It's called a Palooza, the Metal Palooza, and we all get together, and it's like a day. It's like an in-person TED with speakers, and Mick Ebling talked, and Peter Hurley, Mick Ebling, who is the Not Impossible guy. If you look him up,
Past
I
guest on
thought
this
you might be.
podcast.
Peter Hurley, the headshot photographer, he was a speaker. Sasha Strauss, absolutely brilliant sort of teacher about presentations, and many others. It was very inspiring. So yeah, now it's a hybrid organization.
Yeah, and it continues to grow.
Yeah.
It's really impressive.
Yeah, there's two sort of aspects of the group. There's we have a gold and a platinum group. The gold group, it's a men's organization. So if you are a man or you identify as a man, you can come on in and you pay us the $100 a month. You come to our events and you're part of the group. But there's the platinum group within the group, and that's where the deals get done. And to be in the platinum group, you've got to go through a background check. You've got to have a couple of references. You've got a probationary period. We got to figure out who you are. And so, it's a sort of a lot of the gold members aspire to be in the platinum group, and not everybody who applies gets in, because that's the sort of the Uber group within the group.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that's pretty new, right? I don't recall having those 2 tiers.
Yeah, we started that this summer based on demand from the guys.
Okay.
Gotcha. If you are, it's for successful men in their sort of 30s and above. But there are times when you just need to know that you meet a guy and that he is who he says he is. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's one of the important roles of mastermind leader is the curation of the group.
Yeah, that's right.
Of
that's
each
right.
member. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing that you do that's I think pretty unique and special about your group is the Foundry. And why don't you explain what that is and how you came to dream that up?
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is something that's very dear to my own heart. As you said in my introduction, I've been intrigued with and participating in men's group work or men's work generally for 35 years. And there,
Why don't you define for our listener who's not familiar with that term, men's work? Why don't you explain what that is?
absolutely. Group work is where typically, 5 to 15 people sit around in a circle and talk about things. They talk about things that matter. The most famous example of this, of course, is recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, right? That's a very known example of group work where you would go to one of those meetings and then you would say, I'm Will and and that is a sort of a known version of what group work is. However, outside of that, um, there are circles where you can go. If you're a veteran, there are veteran circles where you can go on a regular basis and get support, peer support from other guys or other people that are sitting in the circle. And in men's work, there's a very well-known organization called the Mankind Project, who, if you're interested in explicitly interested in this kind of work, they're a good example. Um, you sit around, and by talking about your problems, you're able to get support, and often just talking about something helps you. So I've been around, and they're sometimes industry based. So when I was working behind the scenes in the record business as an engineer producer, there was a group of engineer producers in New York where I was living and working at the time that used to get together and we'd have a dinner together. That was kind of group work because we're all doing the same role in studios all day and all night long. It's very interesting. So uh, peer driven professional sport groups is another thing. Back to the Foundry. One of the challenges in any kind of group work is that if you sit in a circle with 12 other people, in our case, guys, and you go around the circle sharing in the same direction, first of all, you know it when it's your turn to talk. And it's a sort of human thing that you get nervous about when it's your time to talk. So you're not present while the people are talking before you. Of course, you're trying to think about what you're going to say. And the second thing is, particularly in a group, in a lot of men's work, is if there are guys in the group who have very significant trauma, someone who is, ex-military, or someone whose, wife was killed in a car accident, or someone who's lost someone to suicide, these things. If you become part of a regular group, and what's happening to you is your wife is just mean to you all the time, right? That's it. She's just mean to you all the time. And as you're sitting around the group listening to these other guys talk, when it gets to you got nothing. You're like, well, I'm here to support, really. My wife's mean from you. It doesn't matter compared to what these guys have been through. And what happens over time is you just have this obligation to go to support these other men, which is a good thing to do. But over time, you are not being yourself. You're not being heard. And so the Foundry was a sort of a flash of like inspiration that came to me one day when I was like, oh, I was watching a football game, an American football game. I was like, oh, there's a grid and there's a time. Maybe we can. What happens if we run this on a grid? What happens if everybody gets 8 minutes to speak and we keep it completely? 8 minutes is all you get, but during your 8 minutes, you get full attention of the whole group. The group is directed, that no one gives you advice unless you ask for it. And there's a few other sort of guidelines around that. And then going back to what I was talking about, direction, the person talking hands the metaphorical talking stick to the next guy. So you have no idea whether you're going to be next or not. These two things, these two sort of aspects of the process really change the effectiveness and the experience of a new guy coming in to talk. So the Foundry is a metal only, internal members only meeting. We do it online. We do it 3 times a week: Tuesday night, Thursday morning, Sunday morning, time specific. And it's a place where you can come and talk about what's going on, top of mind. But it's not just trauma and tragedy and bad things. Here's something I've found, Stephan. You've been a best-selling author yourself. As a man, if you achieve a life goal, you've written a best-selling book, you had a #1 song. Blessedly, I've had a few of those. You achieve this absolute pinnacle of success. You literally have climbed Everest. What people don't know is that within 2 or 3 weeks, you will enter a dark, dark phase. The depression kicks in, the lack of direction kicks in, and you will be completely lost. I've seen it happen every time this happens. Wow. And part of it is that we are so driven by men. As men, we're like, here's the target, here's the target, here's the target, here's the, that's all you do. I'm going to, you're like monkey chasing a banana. There's the banana, right? And so when you catch the banana, right, now what you're going to do? You've lost yourself. And in the Foundry, it's a confidential space, so I'm not going to mention any names, of course, but guys who've been incredibly successful, had a best-selling album, guys who sold the company for $200 million, they're just like, oh. And so that's something that we talk about. What about in your own life? Of course, you've been very successful. Has that happened to you?
Not in recent times, but I've had a spiritual awakening. So
Right.
I was shown like this kind of, I don't know, simulation of reality that we think is so real.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, uh, yeah, I don't think I think in the same way as most people
That's
these
true. I would
days.
say that in a very positive way when I describe you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So, speaking of like spiritual seeing and experiencing and seeing, the code in the matrix, you had that that
Mm-hmm.
NDE, that near death experience, and now, like I know one thing that we've talked about offline uh, in the past is your connection with aspen
Mm-hmm.
trees. And yeah, so can you talk a bit more
Sure.
about, I mean, we'll get back to the
Sure.
Foundry and some maybe uh, anonymized anecdotal success stories and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for now, let's go down this tangent around the NDE and how transformative it was for you.
Yeah. Thank you. One evening in 2018, June the 28th, I was at home. I was not yet living with my now wife. She was just sort of a come in at the weekend girlfriend. She had a place in Hollywood. I was living in the West Side in Los Angeles. Usually on a Monday, she would go back to her place. She's a counselor and a therapist. She has her clients there. And for some reason, that Monday she stayed over. At about
No
11:30 at night,
coincidences, though.
we were in bed, and all of a sudden, she kind of pushed me and she said, I've been told, she said, are you okay? And she discovered that I had gone blue and I had stopped breathing. I have no recollection of this. I have no recollection of having had the heart attack, which happened. I had something called a widowmaker, which is only 2% of people survive. And I have no recollection of 2 weeks before this. It's been wiped from my memory, which is a very weird thing. She did CPR for 10 minutes. She called the medics. The medics came. They got my heart started again. people who survive a widowmaker always have someone do CPR within less than a minute, because if the blood stops going to your brain, it starts, so if you do survive, you'll have cognitive impairment. So to cut a long story short, 10 days later, I wake up out of a coma with my friends and family surrounding me in the hospital room, just going, what on earth happened? They said, you had a heart attack. And I was like, what? And I was a bit loopy because of the meds, that they put you on. And it was weird. It was like it was happening to someone else, And I was lying there in the hotel, in the hospital bed on a ventilator. And I just realized, wait a minute, if someone pulls that plug out of the wall right now, I'm literally done, because it is keeping me alive. I can't breathe on my own. And when someone is intubated, when you're on a ventilator, the goal of the doctors is one thing: to get you off it so you can breathe on your own. So you're a viable human being again, the breath. If you can't breathe on your own, when a baby is born, if he or she doesn't breathe, that's why they spank the baby on the butt, right? When the baby comes out. If the breath doesn't happen, there's no life. So they tried to extubate me. They tried to pull the tube out twice. And both times was a code blue situation where they have to then resuscitate you and put it in. It's kind of traumatic, putting it mildly, if that's happening to you. And the night before, this was on day 11, I'm in the ICU at UCLA in Santa Monica. And the night before the third time, I was just lying there and I was surprisingly peaceful. I was like, okay, really surprising. The peace and the calm. I'm like, this may be it. Okay, I've had a good life. It was really extraordinary. And all of a sudden, in that moment, in that thought, I just had this vision of these trees being aspen trees. Now, I've got a tattoo on my hand here, on my arm, excuse me. You can see, I'm holding it up to the camera if you're listening to this. This is a forest of aspen trees that are on my arm in the same direction as my veins. And every time I visualized the aspen trees, I was calmed. It was extraordinary. It was like soothing. I just see these trees. Now, I'd never had anything consciously to do with aspen trees. I didn't even know at the time they were aspen trees. I was just seeing these white trees that with kind of thin trunks on a mountaintop, and it was just beautiful. And I noticed in my visualization that some of the trees have this like mark on them, a little bit like an eye. You know what I mean? They have this like eye shaped. And so,
not the letter I,
no,
but
absolutely,
an
like
eye
a human
seeing.
eye. It's a very specific thing. If you see an aspen tree, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's where a branch was that fell off. By the way, that's how they're formed. And so I kept seeing this vision of the aspen trees, and then the next morning, they were taking this out, and as I was going through that experience,
So they were X-tubing you
they're
again
X-tubing me, for
for
the third time.
our listener who's
Yeah,
not seeing the video.
right. So they're X-tubing me. They're pulling the actually what they do first of all is they don't pull the tube out, but they turn the oxygen off. So if you can't breathe on your own, you start choking. So they turn the pump off so that you're still breathing through the tube, but it's your own breath doing it. And I realized, oh, aspen trees, don't they all have a common root? I was like, I think they do. And so I was thinking about the sort of the science. There's the trees, they're all the same organization, the same organism, and then they being the medical team, they successfully turned the assisted breathing off, so I'm breathing on my own. And then I'm just lying there breathing through the tube, but breathing on my own. And literally, the medical staff and the friends and family in the room are all applauding. And I'm like, okay. And then they kept me on the machine like that for 2 more hours, breathing on my own, but through the machine. And I gave, like, you can't talk when you're like that. You have a pad. I was like, pass me my phone. And I'm looking up, I'm like, aspen trees, they share a common root. All of the trees have the same DNA. It's one organism. And that, I was like, oh, we humans, we are the trees, and the root we connect to through our breath is God, universal energy, whatever you like to call it, the life force. Every time we breathe, we connect to the life force. And I was just had a sort of, oh man, it's very simple. You don't have to breathe to connect or believe to God. Excuse me, you don't have to believe in anything to connect to God. You just breathe. You breathe in. I just saw you do it just then. And so we're all connected to this universal energy, God, the life force, Jehovah, whatever you want to call it. There is a thing, the life force, that you connect to through your breath. And when they took the ventilator out of my mouth and I could breathe on my own, I had this sort of peace when I understood how it all works. It's so beautiful and it is so simple. You breathe in, joyful note, all religions ever in the world, we all sing. Humans sing. You breathe in, connect to God, and then you breathe out, joyful noise unto the Creator. It's a thing. And I've always worked as a musician, as a songwriter, with amazing vocalists. The guys in London Beat, Annie Lennox, Hall and Oates. I've worked with some amazing vocalists. And when someone can sing like that, they connect. And then on the out breath, they sort of connect an audience to it. And so that was my aha moment. And then later on, of course, I got a tattoo of the, to remind me of the aspen trees. And then as soon as I could, even within 4 weeks, I went up into the mountains with my wife into Colorado we went to Crested Butte where the aspen trees are. And I walked around in the forest. It was fantastic. So,
wow. Were you able to connect with them, like commune with
um,
them? Like
I wouldn't say
connect
that.
with like their consciousness?
I wouldn't say that, but I would say that I was able to verify the peace and the calm of understanding how that organism works. If there's a forest fire, the aspens grow back first, right? Why? Well, because they're just they're visible parts of the organism, and then aspens grow by there's a root grows under the aspens can grow through granite rock. The roots are huge. They're like 6 feet across, some of them, bigger than the trees. And then a little shoot pops up somewhere, and then an aspen tree grows. It's so fascinating. So that's my story about the aspens, Stephan. And
Amazing.
it's been a metaphor. It's been a metaphor for the calm and the peace. Meditation is all about the breath. I've been playing the didgeridoo recently, which is all about the breath. And I actually want to do a TED talk one day about this, where the problem for many people about believing in any kind of religion is there's a sort of suspension of belief. You have to jump over that hurdle of belief. Do you believe in XYZ? But if you look in a microscope and you see a cell divide into 2 cells, you don't have to believe in anything. You just watch that happen. And it could be a blade of grass. It could be a human being. It could be a dolphin. It could be anything. That's the way life works as a cell. And it goes into 2, and then it goes into 4, and so on. But if you talk to biologists, and through M.E.T.A.L, I know a ton of, real scientists, and you say, why are those cells dividing? Why? And they'll say, well, there's the electrical differential between this and the chemical imbalance and the osmosis. I'm like, no. Why? What's making that happen? What is it? And eventually they come back to, there's some kind of energy, like a life force, that's making that happen. And you're like, you'd have to believe in anything to be able to observe that. There is a life force that's keeping all this happening. To go back just full circle to the question, when you breathe in, you connect to that life force.
Yeah.
This is my personal view on it, and has been shared. I've spoken to quite a few other people who've had life, NDEs like I did, and we all have the same. We've all got the same conclusion. You connect to the life force through your breath. If you have a widowmaker like I did, there's no shutting down the brain. It's like pulling the plug from a computer. You're instantly unconscious. There's no tunnel of light and St. Peter and Paul and seeing your friends. And none of that. That doesn't happen. You're just gone.
Wow. That's really a profound experience that you shared, and
Yeah, thank you.
certainly transformational. So I think the aspens, as one organism, if a pest attacks one tree on one side of the forest, then all the trees in the forest then excrete
That's right.
protective, I don't know whatever, some sort of chemical or
That's right.
something, pheromone or
Yeah.
whatever, to repel the
Yeah.
pest. So the whole forest immediately is on alert just because
Yeah.
one tree
Yeah.
got attacked. I think that's really
It's
cool too.
fantastic. And you talked about the sort of the presence of the trees as you were asking me that question. There is a peace. A
Mm.
lot of people find peace in the forest, but particularly in an aspen forest, there is a sort of a tangible sort of, it's alive, but it's still, but it's peaceful. But you realize there's an organism, a living organism there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, trees are really special to me too, and not just aspens. I mean, I just love trees, and I do connect with them. Yeah. I mean, everything is
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. There's nothing that is
Mm-hmm.
not of God. There's nothing independent of
Yep.
God. So, a child's toy that seems to be talking to him or her because they're in
Yeah.
conversation, the
Yeah.
toy and the child, that could be
Yeah.
real, like, because it's made of
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, just like everything
That's
else
exactly
is.
right.
A tree is made of consciousness.
Yep.
A desk that you sit at is made of consciousness because there's nothing but consciousness.
Yep.
And it's the universal substrate of universal intelligence.
Yep. It's much simpler than you
Cool.
think it
All
is.
right.
Well, not that you think it is,
Yeah.
because I think we're on the same page here, but it's much simpler than
Yeah.
society would generally have you think it is.
Mm, yeah. I had a profound experience thanks to a M.E.T.A.L member that I met in a Zoom breakout, who ended up saving one of my family members' lives, because I was interviewing him for this podcast, and during the podcast, this family member was having a stroke.
Whoa.
And didn't believe it and wasn't going to go to the hospital.
Whoa.
Yeah. What are the odds? That's because there are no odds.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You said
Yeah.
it was very fortunate that your girlfriend at the time, now
Yeah.
wife, was staying over on the Monday night, because that was uncommon. Well, there was no other way. It's a rigged game. This is a rigged game, rigged in your favor. You
Yeah.
were not going to die alone.
Yeah.
She was going to revive you, or sustain you until the paramedics arrived. That was
Yeah.
just part of the deal, part of the arrangement.
There's another piece
And
actually hanging off on what you've
yeah,
just said that I don't often talk about, and that is about 4 months only before this happened to me. I woke up. I was on a metal hike. We do hikes on a Sunday morning in varying parts around the world. I was on a
yeah,
metal
those
hike,
were so fun. I miss
right?
those.
I was on a hike. I was on a metal
Yeah.
hike, and somebody fell down and hurt themselves. And there was a physician on the hike, who was able to help them, and it was quite a bad cut. And I said to my wife, to then my girlfriend, I said, I think I need to get first aid and CPR. I need to learn this in case. And what would I do if someone went down? I want to find that out. So she was like, okay. I said, okay, I found a spot to go and learn first aid and CPR at Red Cross in Santa Monica. And she said, well, I'm coming too. I'm like, okay, why? She goes, well, what happens if something happens to you? I was like, okay. 4 months later, after having learned CPR, both of us, she saved my life with CPR. It's a rigged game.
Wow.
You can't make this stuff up. That's what happened.
When you were talking about, yeah, I mean, because it's all arranged. Yeah. I mean, you co-write this movie script called Your Life before you incarnate here. All the wild stuff that happens is not just random. It's nothing random here. Yeah. So when I ended up interviewing Mark Nelson, it just so happened that was the moment that this family member was having the stroke. And
wow.
Yeah. Wow. So my wife interrupted the interview, slipped a piece of paper to me to ask him about what was going on, and he nailed it. He absolutely nailed it.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we were able to make sure that she got the help she needed. Yep. Amazing. So M.E.T.A.L is life-saving too, as you've experienced.
Yeah, personally, yeah. By the way, I met my wife, Melissa, on a hike through M.E.T.A.L. to go even further.
Of course. Yeah. Totally rigged. Yeah. Something you said earlier about singing, and just reminded me again of another M.E.T.A.L member and past guest on the show, Roger Love. Amazing.
Roger Love.
Yes, voice coach to the stars, like famous singers he's coached.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
And he explained something really cool to I don't remember if it's in the episode or not, but at some point he explained that people who stutter cannot continue stuttering while they are singing, because they have a continuous stream of air going out the whole time. So there's no room to get caught up in your head because you've stopped the breath. As long as the breath is going, because you're singing, you can't stop the breath while you're singing, so you will not stutter. How cool is that?
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to cure their stutter, they need to not interrupt their breath. They need to just work on making a continuous stream, so they don't keep the staccato nature of their communication. They try to imagine it's just like he described it as a yellow stream of breath going out all the time. Just keep talking until you are done, and then you will not stutter.
You've just reminded me that a singer that we used to know and work with back in the 80s called Paul Young. He had some big hits. And the London Beat vocalists were in his band. We knew him. He had a stutter, but he never stuttered when he sang. There we go. The light goes off. Yeah. You could always, I presume then, you could sing it instead of saying it. Can I get a sandwich, please?
That's right. But even if you're just saying it, if you operate with the breath as if you're singing it, you don't have to like make it a melody. You can just talk in an ongoing way, and you will not interrupt yourself as long as you continue the breath.
Yeah. The breath is everything. I was really honored in the 80s, in the peak of their success, to work with Dave and Annie in the Eurythmics, and did a few shows with them. And Annie Lennox, who in the 80s was the diva, she was the biggest rock pop singer in the world for many years in the middle 80s. Whenever she came out on stage, even if it was an unruly crowd, You're in Italy. There's a lot of people unruly in a crowd, excited. You're in Dublin. You're in like some place where there's chaos going on. She would take a breath, and on the out breath, you could look at the audience, and they would just sort of be hypnotized. People would be just completely transfixed and taken into another realm when she would sing, and it was an extraordinary thing to see. And now I know what she was doing. She was connecting to universal power, God, and people were then connecting to that energy on the out breath as she sang. And this is why great vocalist Pavarotti, Bono, just making up names here, just think of the great singers that you know that can sort of hypnotize and transfix an audience. Why? How's that happening? What's going on? Right. So yeah, breath, the creator.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's not, as I said before, there's nothing but the creator,
Right.
right? There's nothing but consciousness. So even in the moments in between breath, there's still the creator and there's still that connection because, we are made of the creator, made of consciousness. So there is no separation. That's all illusion.
Yeah.
But if you are in what one past guest described as a thin place where the veil
Mm-hmm.
is thinner.
Mm-hmm.
And for this guy that I'm thinking about, his son had passed, and he would connect with his son in his son's
Mm-hmm.
room, and it was a thin place, his son's room, and it was also a particular time was the thin place. So at like 3 a.m, he'd wake up
Right.
in the middle of the night and go to that room
Yeah.
to connect with his son, and he'd start hearing in his head his son speak to him, and he would journal it, and then he would he wrote whole books based on these journaling sessions, receiving um,
Yeah.
communication from his
Yeah.
son. So thin places can, I think, even be in a moment, like in between moments, like in between the
Yeah.
breaths or on the in breaths
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you can have thin places there too. I mean, I'm in a thin place here. I'm in
Right.
Israel recording this
Yeah. Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
So definitely the veil is thinner
Oh
here.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I know we're up at the time here. So if you have a couple minutes left, you could talk a bit about the masculine intelligence
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
If
I
not, we
I'd
can
love
just
to. Yeah.
wrap up
It's
the
it's
episode.
quite quick. You can tell from the conversation we've had that I've always been fascinated and intrigued with people. I'm a people guy. As a musician, what are you doing? You're playing music for people with other people. It's a band, so it's a people thing. And when I went through the NDE, when I went through the heart attack experience, um, I came out of that with a real commitment to want to make the world a better place. I needed to stop doing trivial things. I needed to stop mentoring people that I liked but weren't actually achieving much. I was wasting a lot of time before that. And that's when I decided to lean in with Ken and to build this men's group of successful men and build that out and create community and create a system and a process and a framework for men like you and me to meet and connect. And
Mhm.
as part of this, so I'm equally left and right brain. I'm equally a scientist and I'm equally a creator, right? So I wondered, do successful men have anything in common? What principles? Are there any principles that you and I, for instance, do we have principles in common? So I put together a research project with 450 of the metal men who come from varying backgrounds in lots of different countries and different, from guys who work in space, robotics, finance, physicians, futurists, all kinds of guys. And I wanted to know, what do we have in common? What are the general principles? And after the beauty of the AI tools now is that you can do quantum analysis, which you could never do before, two types of quantitative and qualitative analysis. And with AI, you can just feed in 4 terabytes of open-ended data and say, what are the common principles that these guys are all talking about? And we did. We found, I feel like I'm on David Letterman show back in the day. Here's my book. So we have a book in the Metal group. It's available on the Metal Men. You just go to metal.men and you can see this. And we called it Masculine Intelligence. And I'm going to quickly go through. I'm going to go through the 8 principles. They're kind of simple. The first one is we're all curious. We're all curious. If you got on a plane and they say, please put your cell phone or laptop away, but there's an in-flight magazine in front of you, the chance of you picking that up and just because you're curious, be like, that's interesting, right? Next thing is we're all creative. So when you're curious about something, then you're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what I could do with this piece of information, right? There's a new type of apple that no one's eaten before that's a combination of an apple, a pear, and a gooseberry. I don't know, I'm making this up. That's I wonder if that would grow in this part of Canada that you can't grow anything. I'm just making it up. You see that? It's the process here, right? And then the third thing is we're resilient. So we're curious, we're creative, and we're resilient. So we don't give up easily, but we also know when to hold them and fold them, right? So it's about a reality of the resilience. The fourth one is integrity. We all have integrity. You can't survive. I'm talking from a man's perspective here because, I'm talking about M.E.T.A.L. That's our website, who we are. But this is true for any human being, integrity. You've got to keep your word to your customers. And then the fifth one is brotherhood. You've got to have other men around you who are not random. What I mean by that is they're not like the fathers of your friends' kids or your neighbors. They can be nice people to hang out with, but this is actionable, intentional men friends who can keep you on the straight and narrow. The next thing is financial literacy. So it's not about being a whiz on the stock market or being a crypto bro, or you just got to understand how value is provided, for goods, services, information. You just understand how you get money, you keep money, and you grow money. You've got to understand it. Don't be scared of it. It's energy. Money is energy, right?
That's right.
The seventh thing is we've all had professional development as an important part of our careers. So we've had coaches, mentors, we're reading, you're keeping up to date, right? I mean, your world of the search engine optimization world is, I think, has the shortest half-life of any industry I can think of. It's out of date tomorrow. 20 minutes from now, it's all changed, right?
And yet I publish books.
Ironically, right?
On the topic.
And then the last thing is probably the most important. And remember, these topics came about from a detailed conversation, open-ended conversation with 450 very successful men. And the last thing is a work-life balance. Understanding how a work-life balance should work is to do with health and wellness. It's to do with balance generally in the rest of your life. And we're at a point in time where screen life and real life, right? Screen time and home time, screen time and human time. Screen time, it's an accelerating rate of change. It's getting neck-snappingly nuts. AI is changing everything, and we haven't even got to quantum computers yet, which will mean that everything changes again. The first quantum service that's going to be out imminently. It's already, IBM already have this out working. It's going to be, a million or 10 million times faster to do stuff. I mean, there's huge changes here. So as successful men, we have to keep an eye on what's happening in the technology, in the screen time. At the same time, in real time, you've got to slow down. Take a breath, slow down, be present. Sit at dinner, put your phones away, hang out with your kid. Your kid's only going to be 6 once asking you those crazy questions. Why? right? Be present and sit. And so we have this kind of crazy duality that we as successful men have to deal with. On the one hand, keeping up with changes, professional changes, societal changes, all of these things. And at the same time, needing to slow down and smell the roses. And just talking to other guys about how the hell are you managing to talk about that? What's the secret? How do you handle that, Stephan? Right? So those are the eight principles: curiosity, creativity, integrity, resilience, brotherhood, financial literacy, professional development, and managing work-life balance. Those are the eight principles.
And you came up with that through research.
Yeah, that we didn't just make
Was there
these up.
something particular that strikes you about how that research was done, or how those principles came out of the research that you want to share?
That's the start of a much longer conversation, but
Okay.
in the short version of it is, we asked open-ended questions to 450 guys about what do you attribute your success to. We didn't mention principles. We didn't mention we were looking for 8 principles. We were just like, what's made you successful? Tell us more about that. Tell us about a time when things went south, things went terribly wrong. What was that like? Give us some tips on how to talk to us a little bit about your family and your personal life. How do you manage stress at work? There was like a lot of questions. And then out of those open-ended responses, there was no checkboxes. This is all about tell us stuff. Then we were able to ask the AI engines, and in particular, there was a couple of Claude updates that really helped us with this. And then we were able to say, with all of this data, are there any general principles that came out? And these eight things came out loud and clear. And when we looked at the data through another tool and looked at the same, asked it different questions, how, you're a data guy, you got to look at the data through 5 or 6 different ways to make sure the data is giving you the right message. And so we couldn't have done this. I guess we could have done it a few years ago, but I'd had to have hired a team of, qual researchers to do that at vast personal cost. So, yeah, it's interesting. Once you become conscious of the sort of principles, I've now got to the point where when I'm doing something, I'm like, is this fitting into one of the principles? And it always does. Oh yeah, I'm learning about my career or a potential career, or I'm curious about this thing. My favorite metal speaker of all, for years and years and years, was a weird bat scientist. Were you here when he was talking?
No.
This guy was talking about bats and how important they are, and how particularly in some US cities, they have a fundamental role because they got a lot of bad press because of the Wu-Tang, all of the COVID stuff. But bats have a huge role in managing insect populations and all other things. And so he said, if you buy this bat house on Amazon, you can put it in your yard, and if you've got bats, they'll come and stay there. And of course, I was like, straight on Amazon, got myself a bat house, but I live in Culver City in West Los Angeles, and there's no bats here. I discovered. Never have been. The bats are in the hills, which are about 2 miles over there. So I got a bat house with no bats in it. But that's just a really good example of curiosity, creativity. I get myself a bat house, finding out more about bats.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you'll have to find a new home for your bat house. Somebody who lives.
If anybody listening wants a bat house, I got one in the shed. I never use it.
That's a great way to end our conversation. So, if our listener wants to perhaps get the book, if they want to perhaps join M.E.T.A.L, if they're a man and want to join M.E.T.A.L, do you have a women's
No,
group
no, we don't.
still, or did that
No,
get
we don't.
shut down?
We are a men's group. That's what we do.
Okay.
And
So if somebody who's listening, who's a man, wants to join, where do they go? And if they want to get the book, where do they go?
M.E.T.A.L.men. That's it.
Simple enough.
There it is. And we're on all the socials and all of that stuff. And come on in.
Yeah.
20% of our new members come in from our members' wives and girlfriends recommending M.E.T.A.L to their wives and to their girlfriends or husbands. So it's we're better men, and provably so, and the women think so too.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly recommended M.E.T.A.L to many men over the years. Many.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to see you again, Stephan. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, and thank you, listener, for just being part of this community and being a force for good in the world. So hope that you continue to do so. Have a great week, and just be the change in the world that you want to see.
Yep.
We'll catch you in the next episode. In the meantime, have a fantastic week. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off. If you want to hear more from my guest, Will Henshall, check out my previous interview of him, episode 83 at getyourselfoptimized.com/83. If you want to hear more conversations like this on finding your peace and purpose, then I recommend episode 398 with Dr. Eben Alexander, episode 436 with James Goulden, and episode 493 with Marie Elizabeth Malie. Also, I invite you to check out the show notes, transcript, action-based checklist, and all the URLs mentioned in this interview with Will Henshall at getyourselfoptimized.com/506. If you enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to share this episode and, more importantly, the entire show, Get Yourself Optimized, with a friend. Change your life and help me spread the light. Thank you.